Hey there, I'm Kathleen, and today I'm going to show you guys how to make an amazing cake that will have your guests simply saying, dang, that's delicious. We are going to start with an amazing chocolate cake, and you saw me make the rounds. I've got three 10-inch rounds. I've got a large board here, and then I've got three 6-inch rounds. Now, the reason we want there to be a larger discrepancy in the size is so that once the two tiers are stacked, it looks really nice. If you use an 8-inch and a 6-inch, or a 6 and a 4, or a 10 and an 8, they start to just sort of, look like one tall thing with just a little difference. Whereas if you have a larger span between your cake pans, you end up with a nice contrast, and that's what we're going for. In fact, just to give you an idea, you can see we're going to have contrast. Unlike if we were to use something that's a little bit smaller, you just don't get the same effect. We're going to start with our peppermint frosting. Now, you can make this in advance, which is what I did. You can also choose to tint this if you wanted to, whether it be for a themed birthday party or maybe a Christmas party, something of that nature. I don't like to tint it unless I have to, because colors are expensive. I get the whole, all natural, blah, blah, dye-free, yada, 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 all that stuff. And so you end up paying quite a bit for colors. So unless I really need it, I don't use it. Plus, with this particular cake, I want contrast. And so we're gonna have this nice white contrasting with the brown, contrasting with our top tier, and it's just gonna look really nice. And then the chocolate drop that we're gonna add afterwards, that will also stand out against this frosting. So what we're going to do, we've got a little bit of frosting glue, and you'll just take your first cake layer. Make sure you remove the parchment paper, and we will pop that right on. I like to keep paper towels handy so that way I don't have to get my hands dirty all the time. And just give that a little press. Okay, now my cakes are frozen. The reason why is because when you're working with freeform, especially because I'm working with freeform, you don't have to work with freeform. The cakes frost up really well when they're frozen. Now, if your cakes are not frozen and you have a delicate cake, there's a good chance your cake will start to, fall apart or be a little bit weird. And so by having them frozen, it just makes it a lot easier once you go to frost. Today we are going to be making essentially like the naked shabby chic style cake, which means, number one, less frosting, which is good because, sometimes people, they've had enough. So what we'll be doing is we're gonna put down a good amount between the layers. So here I've got an offset spatula, also known as an angled spatula. And we're just going to take this frosting right up to the edge, okay? And if you have something really fun to add to your cake, like maybe some mini chocolate chips, or even if we weren't using a peppermint frosting, but well, technically you could do it with peppermint, but especially if you had like a vanilla frosting, crushed pretzels, because you get that crunchy, salty, chocolatey combination, you could just sprinkle that right on if you wanted to. And there is no need to be perfect here, right? You'll notice I'm not trying to make anything look perfect. The main thing is just to make sure that the frosting is nicely spread. And now we're just going to pop out our next layer. Now, if your layer doesn't want to behave, grab yourself a Vitamix spatula and just go around the edges. I love these little Vitamix spatulas. They are one of the most underrated tools anywhere on the internet, and just in general. They're so thin, which makes them super flexible. It does also make them a little bit prone to, I don't want to say tearing, but kind of like tearing a little bit. You start to notice like they get a little jinky around the edges and you have to replace them. But these are for a lot more than just blending. And now our cake just pops right out with the help of that spatula. And same deal, I'm going to remove the paper. And then just pop this right down. Now it's important that you kind of take a look at your cake and center it up as best as you can. Just like so. And it's okay. I mean, you can see that these layers are clearly not the same size. I promise no one's going to complain. No one's going to get this cake and be like, Kathlena, I can't believe you give us a cake that wasn't perfectly level. No, they're not going to say that. They're going to just say, dang, that's delicious. Yeah. Okay, same deal. We're going to pop some frosting here. Right on top. Grab our offset spatula. Okay, you guessed it. Repeat one more time. Now, for your final layer, biggest tip I can give you, don't put it down this way. Instead, what you're going to do is put the top side down. And that is so we have a beautifully flat cake on top. Ta-da! Isn't that great? It's like we're professionals. Okay, we are going to level this one more time. It actually went on pretty well. Okay, let me rinse my fingers. All right, your next step is to fill a decorator bag. No tip. And the goal here is really that we are going to get frosting all over the outside of our cake and get it spread around. So just bag here. Make sure you try to stay mindful of the fill line. If you buy the Wilton ones, which is they're the ones I really like, there's a fill line. If you go above the fill line, it becomes very difficult to hold the bag and squeeze at a steady rate. And that's really important if you want really pretty cakes. I'm just going to cut a very large hole. And that just allows us to do this pretty quickly. And the first thing you'll want to do, if you have any gaps in your cake, you're going to put the bag directly next to the gap and really push to make sure frosting goes inside that gap to fill it, okay? And then we'll go down here and we'll cover up this gap as well. And now we will just put frosting on the cake itself. So now what you'll want is a cake smoothing tool. And I like to get the ones that are a little bit flexible. This is especially helpful if your cake isn't like super perfect. Been there, done that. And what you're going to do is place one hand on one side and you're going to grip this like so. And you're going to place it so that the tool is going to be on the board, okay? And this hand is generally going to stay still and this hand is going to do most of the work. So I'm just spinning and holding. If needed, like if I start to get a little bit stuck, I will move this hand like I just did. But generally, this hand is doing most of the work. And it's okay if your frosting falls a little bit, and it is absolutely okay if your frosting gets dirty. And what I mean by that is we are essentially making a crumb coat, but our crumb coat in this case is also our final coat. So I'm just going around. Okay. And now what I'll do is I'm just going to take this frosting here And anywhere I see an open spot, I'm just going to try to go in and fill it in. Okay, same thing over here. It's a lot of open edge. And you can also see there's this little gap here on the bottom. So I'm going to get a little more frosting in my bag. And I made a double batch of frosting, but I'm also being very mindful to leave enough frosting for the top. Okay. And anywhere you see kind of a hole, you're just going to go through and pipe on a little bit of frosting just like that. Okay. And we will repeat with our tool. And you can see there's already a pretty big difference just in doing that. Now there are still a few more spots, like right in here. So I'll do the same thing. Just going to grab my offset spatula. Okay, now what you'll want to do, roll up your sleeves, because you don't want to get your sleeves in it. You're going to take this hand that's been basically your turning hand, and you're going to put it right here. Notice it's going to line up with the smoothing tool, but a little bit past it, okay? So, like so. You don't want this, you don't want this, and you don't want this. What you want is this, okay? You're going to grab this hand, you're going to hold still on this side, okay? And you're just going to semi-slowly rotate the entire thing. This will give your cake a nice final finish. And if you have any vertical seams from starting and stopping, it essentially erases the seams and creates one final seam. Notice how my hand is now going under where I started. And now I've stopped spinning and I'm pulling away. Okay? So it's you go around, you go under, and when you start to do the under is when you kind of do your final smooth and then you gently pull off. And what you end up with, especially like right in here, you have super smooth sides, and that's what I'm here for, the super smooth sides. Now, if you're like me and then you look at your cake and go, well, there's this one spot that's not perfect, you can fix it or you can leave it. It's totally up to you. Sometimes I fix it, sometimes I leave it. I think today I'll probably fix it, I'm not gonna lie. Now, before we move on, we need to do one more thing, and that's we need to build up a little bit of an edge. Normally on a smaller cake, and I'll be able to show you that on the smaller cake when we do it. It's easier to do. On these larger cakes, it's a little bit harder, but it's okay. Now, what we're really trying to essentially fix, see like this little divot right in here, right? We need to go in and essentially put a little bit of frosting all the way around the top of our cake. And it may seem a little bit counterintuitive, like, why are we doing this? We're gonna cover it up. All the questions. It's cool. Ask away. The key here is that we want to make it so that we can essentially build an edge and have a nice edge to our cake. Now, like I said, I am gonna fix a couple of spots because I see a couple of things. If you know me, then you know that I just can't help myself. I just need to fix it. Okay, for this last go around, I'm probably gonna go around twice. It's very important. Before I was holding my cake smoothing tool more like this, but it's very important for the last bit, especially when you're working with taller cakes. You either need to move your hand up or you need to have a wider grip. A wider grip is harder to pull off because your thumb is essentially pressing right here. So it might be a little bit easier just to move your hand up. And that's going to make sure that we get enough pressure on this top bit of frosting that we just added. It's very, very important for the final look, okay? Now, you can see how I just sort of stopped and paused. Every time you pause, that's where those vertical seams come in that I was talking about earlier. And then when we do that final go around, that's what we're essentially erasing, or any pauses that we had. Okay, last go around for me. I'm happier. Okay. Now what you're going to do is bring in the edge, okay? And this is another reason why frozen cakes work really well, because it makes the edge bit, I don't know, I think it's easier. I could be biased though. So what you'll do is just pull in and drag and then wipe off your spatula. Okay, so there we have it. This is our first tier. This will be the base of the next cake. I'm going to add some frosting on top. I've got a little more frosting in my bowl. What's important to know is that if you are not doing the naked cake style and you're going to actually add a final coat of frosting or whatever it is you're going to do, this is your crumb coat only. So now is when you would freeze your cake, let it set, and then pull it out and frost your final layer. Because this is our final layer, this is our final layer. When it comes to the top of a multi-tiered cake, you need to think about how it's going to eat and how it's going to be decorated. In my case, because I know I'm going to be putting another cake board like right on top, and then when people go to eat it, they're not really going to care about the tops. This is not for a wedding or anything of that nature. It means this top, it doesn't need to be perfect. For the next cake, that'll be the top tier, that one we'll actually give a little extra love and attention to. But for this one, we just need something to coat the top, and then we're done with it. Now, you'll notice that my edges are not perfect, and that's because, number one, I don't feel like going around a bunch more times because I already know how I'm going to decorate it. Because we're gonna have the chocolate going all the way down around all the edges, this whole edge gets covered up anyway, which means do not stress over it. It's already gonna be covered up. So I'm gonna get this cake into the freezer. I'm going to pop this into a bag. That way we can put a foot on this later. Basically, I'm just gonna get a little bit of tidying done and we'll move on to the next tier. Okay, we are going to start on our second tier. I've also got hot water. It's a double boiler so that we can melt down chocolate and give it a little bit of a temper. You can learn all about that on the website. I'm not gonna take up all your time with how to temper chocolate. It's a whole process. That way when we do our drip, our chocolate just looks really nice. Do you need to temper? No, you really don't. Not for this application, especially if number one, you're not selling the cakes. Number two, you are keeping the cake refrigerated or frozen. And number three, it's being eaten right away. Well, I guess number four, and you don't want to like have it sit out and be used for photos for like 3 days or something. When you don't temper the chocolate properly, that's where you get that streaking, also sometimes called chocolate bloom, like the little spots or just lines where it starts to look a little bit discolored. And that's from it just not being tempered. But in this application, the cakes are frozen, the chocolate will be cooled down a bit, and it freezes on impact, which means there's no bloom, there's no issue. But how you plan to use the cake in the long run, that's what you need to be concerned about. So we are going to essentially repeat all the things we did with our larger tier, just on a smaller scale. I'm gonna put down a little bit of this frosting glue. And you can either cut a board to size, which is what I did, or you can buy smaller boards. It doesn't matter. Nobody, again, unless you're selling these, no one's gonna be like, I can't believe you did that to the cake. Like, nobody's gonna say that. It's important that if you're mixing flavors, which is what I will be doing, I've got 2 different types of chocolate cakes for this particular project, and the frostings are different. So the large tier had peppermint, and this smaller tier is going to have coffee. It's important that you use different tools so that you don't transfer residue from one flavor to the next. If you only have one of the tool, wash it really well before you move on, which is what I did for my cake smoothing tool. It's funny because I do have an extra one, but that's the one I like the most. So it gets cleaned in between projects if needed. I have a bag of frosting loaded. Again, large cut. And on this cake, it's a lot more pronounced. You can see the gaps. And that's really what we need to go through and fill in. And now we'll just go all around the sides. And it's going to be the same style as before. It's going to be a naked cake. This time I will be a little more mindful to put frosting around the top. That way I have less work overall. All right, I'm gonna do my final roundabout. And if your cake board slides around, you can put a little damp cloth underneath and it'll help it adhere. I didn't really need to today because it's just a little project. Okay, same deal. Because the edges are already ready to receive me, I don't have to do this again, so I'm just gonna go pull this all the way in. If I didn't know any better, I'd think I'd do this regularly. Now, as you'll recall, I said we were gonna give a little extra attention to this top layer. I'm going to put down a little bit more coffee frosting, not a ton, but enough because I want the coffee flavor to be the primary flavor. Okay, and once again, I'm not super concerned about these edges because we are going to do a chocolate drip on this tier as well. Now over here, I've got rich, delicious chocolate buttercream, dairy-free of course. And I've got tip 12 loaded. It's a nice open circle. And what you're going to do, number one, make sure your hand is super comfortable. And we are going to just go through and pipe on dots. You'll notice I've left room around the edge, and that's for our chocolate drip. Alternatively, what you could do is do your chocolate drip first, and then you would do your dots on top, and that just allows you to cover up the seam really nicely. Now it's up to you if you go all the way in, if you stay at 2. I'm gonna stay at 2 just to start. And here I've got the 55% chocolate tempered, and I'm working on white chocolate at the same time. What I'm going to do next is swap my cakes. I'm gonna get the other cake out of the freezer so that we can do the chocolate drip on that one. This one will be in the freezer, getting nice and cold. It's already cold, but we want it to be, very cold so that our chocolate sets on impact. And I'm gonna get tidied up and we'll do the next step. Okay, I have the 55% chocolate ready to go. Keep in mind, once you reach this point where your chocolate is ready to use, it is not the time to mess around. You need to move quickly because your chocolate will set on you, which is what you don't want. The size of the hole that you cut will absolutely determine the size of your drip. So make sure you like it. Always start smaller because you can always cut it bigger, but you can't cut it smaller. And what I'm gonna do is put some chocolate here and just let it drop down. And the chocolate is going to set on impact just about. As you do this, I like to vary the length of the drip. I also try to generally keep them about the same width apart, but it's ultimately up to you what you want it to look like. Okay, our large tier is now finished. All right, our last step, well, almost last. We still need to do the feet and, put it together, make it look all pretty, but our last big step is going to be doing a white chocolate drip on this top tier. I'm going to warn you, dairy-free, free from white chocolate, which is what I'm working with, does not behave the same as standard white chocolate. It just doesn't. There's a lot of things you have to just know that it can and cannot do. And usually the best way to temper it is actually to use like a freeze-dried fruit powder, and it helps it do its thing a lot better. Only because we're working on frozen cake am I even attempting this. If this cake was not frozen, this would not work at all. I'm also going to be pouring a little bit slower because this is so much thinner. You can see how fast it flows. What I'm trying to avoid is like a pool of white chocolate at the bottom of the cake. This turned out so great. And there's some extra chocolate, except there's no one around to eat it. Okay, so just so you know exactly how to pull this off, when your chocolate is super thin like the white chocolate is, especially when you're free from, the key really is you're putting just a little bit on, and you're essentially putting a dollop on and dragging your bag just down just a smidge, and it sort of forces that drip to start. That way, by the time the drip rolls down, because it's so thin and the frozen cake element is here to help us, it'll set before it hits the board. You'll see no pool. And you can clearly see the difference, right? Remember how I was able to put big globs of chocolate and bring it down and have it freeze on impact? That's because this chocolate, in fact, it's just been sitting here since I've been working, and it's like very paste-like now, right? It's a very set chocolate, whereas the free from white chocolate won't behave the same. So it's really important to know your materials, because you don't have to be free from to make these cakes that say, dang, I'm delicious. It's just whatever works for you. Know how it operates though, but again, the frozen cake is really the secret weapon. Now what we get to decide is whether or not we want to leave this as is or put a third layer of chocolate on the outside. And honestly, I think I'm just gonna leave it and we're gonna move on. So what we do next is essentially build up our cake. What you'll want to do is find the pretty side of your cake first. Because you know me, I'm always here for a picture. It's not this little piece right here, which can come off. Okay, we're looking for the gorgeous side of the cake. And I think it's going to be right here. There's this tiny, it's always something. Oh man. Okay, let's see. Yeah. Okay, it's right here. I'm just going to like wipe this out. Then we're going to find the pretty side of this cake, and that's going to be right here. And you're going to decide whereabouts you want it. Do you want it in the center? Do you want it offset? If I had a smaller cake board, I might do it offset so that you have like a very pronounced, almost like step, but we're not doing that today. Okay, now what we need to do is essentially link our cakes together. The easiest way to do this is to use a frosting that is neutral. In my case, it's going to be chocolate or vanilla because chocolate can go with coffee or peppermint, and the same is true of vanilla frosting. And what you'll do is, it's really up to you if you want to do like dots, spirals, whatever. And you're essentially going to create a foot on your first cake. But then you're also going to take it out so you cover the gap between the two cakes. I've got tip 32 loaded into a bag with the peppermint frosting, and I'm just going to go through and put a foot on this cake. Okay, so you get the idea. I'm gonna go all the way around, and then we'll really be done. That's it. You get to dance a little, you get to decorate a lot. And at the end, everyone's just gonna say, dang, that's delicious. So up top, I've got this ultra low sugar chocolate cake, and then the coffee frosting, the white chocolate drip, the vegan top 9 free chocolate buttercream, and that's also our transition layer here. We've got our chocolate drip. We've got a standard chocolate cake here. It's the recipe from the old bakery. And we've got the peppermint frosting combined. I like it. I cannot wait to serve it up and for everyone to report in. But we all know, they're just gonna say, dang, it's delicious. Plus they've had this flavored cake before, so I just thought it'd be fun to make one. If you have any questions on how to make tiered cakes, whether they be free from or not free from, feel free to reach out. And I've got info in the comment section-y thing on where you can get more information and also where you can get free from recipes to make amazing, delicious cakes. I'm Kathleen, the Allergy Chef, and I will see you next time.